Digestive problems are very common in this country, and one of the common questions that people ask is it a real problem or is it just anxiety related, and how do I tell? And so when it comes to hiatal hernia syndrome, this is a very big issue to tackle because, and I'll explain why, and then I'm also going to look at just anxiety on its own. But let's start with, you have digestive problems and you also have anxiety, and it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. So with hiatal hernia syndrome, commonly people have acid reflux, and then they also have heart palpitations, they can have shortness of breath, and they can have anxiety. Now there's probably 20 symptoms all told, but let's just focus on those top 4. The acid reflux is pretty easy to diagnose and confirm. People have an endoscopy. They can see that their acid is, the doctor can see that the acid is coming up the esophagus, and that's just pretty easy to diagnose. And of course they have the standard PPI medication, which is a prescription antacid that is given, and sort of, you know, that we can done and dusted, as the expression goes, meaning that's a done. I've you know, as a doctor, I have given the correct medication for that. Now there's a lot of problems with PPIs, but those are on other videos. And then we have, of course, the cardiac related symptoms. So the person says, I have heart palpitations, my heart feels like it's flip-flopping, so off to the cardiologist. And when that testing comes back negative, meaning everything's fine, then the cardiologist and both your primary say, okay, you don't have a heart problem. Okay, fine. Now, but what about my shortness of breath? I'm really short of breath, and I never used to be. Off to the pulmonologist, you get tested for any lung issues, that comes back fine. So now you're in this category of, well, yeah, you do have acid reflux, but there's nothing wrong with your heart and there's nothing wrong with your lungs. So then you have also brought up your anxiety or panic attacks, and you can see where this is going, because, like, well, now we have kind of a health anxious person, right? They have health anxiety about what they're feeling, and there's really nothing wrong. You know, it's probably all in your head. We can give you an anti-anxiety medication. So this is where I have a lot of problems, because all of these medications have dangerous side effects. Most certainly the anti-anxiety meds do, and interestingly, they can cause a lot of digestive complaints, which is the last thing you need when you're already having a lot of digestive upset. They also have this emotional blunting where people say, I just feel like a robot, I can't feel. And I've had patients say, I'd rather be anxious than just be a robot. It's a horrible feeling. Loss of libido, weight gain, etc., etc. So now let's dial it back and say, where is this anxiety coming from when it comes to hiatal hernia syndrome? So what occurs is that, let's go back to the one thing they could confirm, which is the acid reflux. So what happens with acid reflux is your stomach, which is a bag of acid by design, gets compressed. And when that compression happens, just like a balloon full of water that you squeeze, up the top comes the water in the balloon scenario, but in the stomach, up the top, meaning up into your esophagus, comes acid. And so it is that pressure on the stomach that's creating the acid reflux. The stomach is not being bad by producing acid. So then where does the anxiety come from? As the stomach gets compressed and gets elevated, what it runs into is your diaphragm, which is a very powerful muscle and organ both, that allows air to come in and out of your lungs effortlessly. When the stomach comes in contact and pushes up into the diaphragm kind of spasms. So you're still breathing, but you're not adequately getting as much air, which, if you have the shortness of breath symptom, you're very well aware of. Now, what also happens when you think about it, we cannot live very long without oxygen. So as a protective mechanism, part of our nervous system is very attuned to how much oxygen is coming into your body. And when that diminishes a bit, remember, you're still breathing, but it's diminished from its optimal, your nervous system goes, alert, 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 something's wrong. And that something's wrong message that you're getting is via a bunch of stress hormones being produced, and you suddenly feel very anxious. Now you look around your environment and you go, what is this? There's nothing in my environment that should be evoking the response of anxiety. Now, you're correct in your external environment, but in your internal environment, by what I was just talking about, there is a very good reason for that anxiety. Your nervous system is literally trying to protect you by saying, this could be a life or death situation because there's not enough oxygen. So that's where that's coming from. Additionally, with hiatal hernia syndrome, you have the fact that anxiousness can come from vagus nerve irritation. Now, your vagus nerve is your longest cranial nerve. It's very tied into your heart and your esophagus and your stomach and all of your digestive organs, very particularly when that stomach compresses and pushes up onto the base of the esophagus, which is not where it should be. It should be very relaxed below the diaphragm and not irritating the base of the esophagus. But when it does, the vagus nerve is like a web at the base of the esophagus. And when you irritate the vagus nerve, one of the many symptoms that can occur is anxiousness or mood swings. So there is that psychological symptom associated with what happens when your stomach irritates the base of your esophagus, all part of hiatal hernia syndrome. So then you as the patient, all of these anxiety symptoms are being dismissed because these doctors don't understand this interrelationship. So it's not that you're not feeling anxiety. You absolutely are. But what's the cause? How do we fix it? And we fix it by fixing the hiatal hernia syndrome, which is fixing inflammation in your gut, imbalance in your gut, vagus nerve irritation, etc. So that's how we go about it. Now, what if you're someone who has anxiety and you don't really have any other major symptoms, but you're somebody, and I hear this from patients who say, I'm just an anxious person. I kind of always have been. And it's just what I do. I've been on and off medications, some help, some don't. I don't really like the side effects of the medication. So I'm giving you examples of what I hear. I know some of you are on these medications and you do well with them. That's totally fine. I'm giving you the examples of people who have this issue with anxiety, and it's very tough on them. And if you are anxious, you know this to be true because you're never fully yourself. You're not relaxed. You're not enjoying life as much as you could and should be able to. So with those individuals where anxiety is the primary issue, we still do things like look at their diet. Why? Because a poor diet, especially the standard American diet where 65%-ish of calories come from over-processed foods. The chemicals in those foods are known to be associated with anxiety. What about food sensitivities? Not allergies, but food sensitivities. Gluten in particular is a known neuroinflammatory agent. So you can be sensitive to gluten and it comes up on a test, but the way it's reacting in your body has nothing to do with digestion. You don't have digestive complaints, but you have neurological symptoms. Anxiety can be one of them, depression can be one of them, migraine headaches can be one of them, etc. Okay, so we've looked at diet, we've looked at food sensitivity. We will look at the health of your gut, even though you don't have major digestive symptoms, because your microbiome, the 40 to 60 trillion organisms in your colon, have a very strong brain connection. It's that gut-brain connection that we know to be able to influence one another very strongly. So again, you can have sort of silent gut symptoms, but still have an imbalanced microbiome, but for you, it's creating anxiety as a symptom. Also, we look at toxins. Things like mold and heavy metals. Mold in particular is absolutely known to create anxiety because it crosses what's called the blood-brain barrier of your brain inflames your brain, and there's many symptoms again associated with this, but anxiety is one. Another issue we look at is your genetics, and there's things that you get from mom and dad when you are being created, and they're called SNPs, and I'll tell you about mine. So it's called COMT, and when you have this SNP, which I do, you have what's called a heightened stress response. So your stress level can go from 0 to 100. 0 to 100. We'll stop there. I was about to say 160 for some interesting reason. But your stress response can just go very high up, and then your ability to sort of come down from that stress, you don't do that readily. The other point I wanted to make was, so it's called the fact that you have trouble clearing stress chemicals. So I, historically, would be the person who could get very worked up over something, or if somebody scared me or something, sort of frightened me or startled me. The startling was a big one, and I'd be like, "Wah!" But anybody else without this issue would go, "Oh, you startled me," and then bam, they're done. Not me. I'm just like stuck up there for a while. The beauty of genetics, because a lot of times people go, "I don't want to know my genetics," because they think there's nothing that can be done about them, but there really is. Now, I'm not talking about your hardwired genetics like the color of your eyes. I'm talking about these SNPs, because they can be manipulated in a good way to function better by using specific nutrition. So that's what I do. I used to suffer from this kind of intently, and I didn't sleep very well, and I was just very kind of jittery and high stress because of my genetics, and then I learned what to do to handle them, and I am a much more relaxed person, and it's I sleep better, all of those lovely things. So I just gave you one example of a SNP. There's thousands of them, but you can test for these things and see if you're just that person. And so, they talk about water off a duck's back, and if you're somebody who's a little bit more high strung, and maybe you have a good friend or someone in your family, and they're just like, "Relax, it's gonna be fine," and you're like, it's not fine. This is stressing me out. But part of you goes, "Gosh, I wish I could have that reaction. I wish I could be like that," right? It's that kind of difference, and it's not something you're stuck with. This is something that you can work with nutritionally, if that's the reason why. I'm giving you a number of reasons why. What else do I want to go over? Of course, hormones. So you can have hormonal imbalance, and we as women are much more, I say we, like men are not watching, but women, like myself, have maybe a little higher appreciation of what the ebb and flow of hormones can do to our mood levels, just because women menstruate every month, and they, if you've been pregnant, there's things that as the hormones ebb and flow, you're a little bit more emotional, less emotional, and so we understand how hormone changes can influence that. Then there's hormone imbalances. So there's the normal ebb and flow of hormones in a woman's menstrual cycle, and then there is just imbalance, which occurs from a number of different things, but that imbalance can absolutely create anxiety, depression, etc. So the last one I want to go over was just basic, what we call here at Root Cause, foundational lifestyle basics. And that is things that you do that are not serving you well in this relationship of not being anxious as a symptom. Meaning your sleep hygiene is not great, you don't exercise, you're not hydrated, like really, really basic things that little tweaks can make a huge difference, and all of a sudden you're getting restorative sleep and you are exercising, which is great for mood. That's very well established, and you've just got these basics that are now in and functioning the way they should in your life that really impact. And what we do here at Root Cause, because we're looking at you as a whole, is we're looking for each and every one of those factors that makes sense for you and stabilizing each one. So it is that coming together, it is that synergy of looking at all these factors that for us, I think speaks to our high success rate, because we are able to look at you holistically. So I hope that covered it, because there's just way too often that people are just told, well, you're anxious, that's the way you are. Now, you know, my story again, my mom was the same way, very high strung. So my whole life I was told, well, you're just like your mother. Well, you know, once I became a clinician and, you know, found out certain things, then handled her, handled me, and then we were sort of different people. So we were still the same mother-daughter, but we no longer had migraines and no longer passed out from low blood sugar, and, you know, a plethora of other things that we both had in common because of lifestyle and genetics both. So in families you have, it's not all genetics, it's also the lifestyle that you kind of were raised with, and it's kind of what your family does and doesn't do, etc. So I just really wanted to cover this because it's a very big question that I get. And it's like, well, maybe it's just my stress. It's just my stress. Like we're stuck with that, and you're not stuck with that. And especially when you haven't historically considered yourself an anxious person, and this is a new thing, then delving into where it's coming from is very key. But even if you're like myself, where as a child I was pretty high strung, that didn't mean I had to be that way either. You see, I didn't have to be like my mother. I could figure out my genetics, which of course happened later in life, but and then supporting these SNPs made all the difference in the world. So there's just a lot that can be done. So I don't want you to suffer needlessly. I don't want you to be put in this box of it's all in your head, it's just your stress, try to deal with your stress. There's so many tools that we have that really change everything, and that's what I want for you. So if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're trying to increase our subscribers because then more people get to see this information, and also give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Share it with others who you think might benefit, and we'll talk soon.